What is up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Not So Stupid podcast. Today's episode, we are breaking down simple habit building strategies for you so that you can start to embody and cultivate positive habits that are going to help you become the type of person you want to become. Whether that is a healthier person, whether that's somebody that wants to become more fit, more productive, just a better human being, and all around positive in general. These tools that we are going to be talking about today are going to help serve you one way or another. It just depends how you use them for yourself. Now, the reason we are zoning in on habits, and this is actually a really big part of my coaching practice that I work hand in hand with my clients on, is because, believe it or not, 65 to 80% of the habits, or 65 to 80% of the actions and decisions you make on a daily basis are automatic. They are habit-based. And that's what habits are. They're automatic decisions based on actions you've repeated over and over again. And it's basically what your brain defaults to in any given situation. Now, if you don't have the right habits in place, 65 to 80% of your daily decisions aren't going to serve you or push you forward, right? When we talk about habits, I don't like to label them as good or bad habits necessarily, but positive or negative habits, because a bad habit in one situation or in one context can be a good habit in another situation. So there are going to be positive, neutral, and negative habits. Positive habits helping you are habits that, when repeated often enough, are going to help push you towards your goal. Neutral habits don't really have an impact, positive or negative. They just kind of, it's just something you repeat. Maybe you enjoy it, but it's not really helping you in your pursuit of growth or productivity or fat loss or whatever. And then negative habits are habits that are actually pushing you further away from that goal. So for instance, a habit of checking your phone constantly throughout the workday is gonna lead you to be less productive. So that's a negative habit to have. The habit of binge eating when faced with an emotional situation, that is a negative habit to have if your goal is fat loss, right? So recognizing these and knowing which habits serve you and which habits aren't serving you is really important, because once you recognize which habits you're doing and cultivating right now, and how they impact your overall goal, you can begin to replace those habits, replace the negative habits with habits that are more positive, with habits that are actually going to serve you in your pursuit. So the way you do this is by first, we got to understand how habits work in your brain. There's something called a habit loop. And I dedicated an entire podcast episode on this way back when, probably in episode 20 or something like that. I'll post a link in the show notes for anyone that wants to hear it more in depth. But I do want to touch on this briefly because I think it's important to know. So the habit loop is the feedback loop in your mind that reinforces whether a habit should be repeated or not. And the way the four-phase loop system, four-step system of this loop it's called cue, craving, action, and reward. That's kind of hard for me to phrase. I don't even know if I explained that properly, but the habit loop is how you actually start with performing a habit and what initiates the call to your mind to do this thing and why you repeat it so often afterwards. So it starts with the cue, right? Breaking it down step by step. The cue is the trigger, essentially, to get you to do this habit. So as I mentioned earlier, if you're in a stressful situation, that is a trigger for you to perform a habit. That is a trigger for you to binge eat, right? This is a very common thing that most people kind of go through. They look to food for comfort in these stressful situations. So when they have a stressful situation, that is the cue in their mind to crave. This is the second phase of the habit loop. Crave comfort. They crave comfort through food, usually. The action is actually eating the food, which is the third phase of the habit loop, is doing the actual habit. And the last phase of the habit loop is the reward. And the reward it's not always like a physical reward. You're not always getting a present or anything like that, but it's the relief, the dopamine release that you get in your mind for having performed this habit. So if you are someone that tends to binge eat during stressful situations, you're an emotional eater, you have the trigger of being in a stressful situation. Then you have the craving to find comfort Sometimes that's through food, sometimes it's through other stuff. But if you repeated eating food very often, the craving becomes for food. And then the action itself, the habit itself, is eating the food. And the reward is finding relief, stress relief. You might experience new emotions after repeating this for so long. You might feel guilt, you might feel other things, but the reason your body repeated this so many times in the first place and why it became a habit is because initially and for a good period of time, you did find comfort in doing this action. So even though it's negative for you right now, in the grand scheme of things, it's not helping you with your fat loss goal, let's say, it was quote unquote positive in finding you relief. It worked to some capacity, and that's why it's there in the first place. But now you don't want to have that habit anymore. Now you want to cultivate a positive habit that is going to help you with fat loss, for instance. And the way you want to approach that, the way you're going to do that for yourself, is by taking these 4 phases and kind of playing around with 1, 2, or all of the phases of the habit loop. So for instance, we're going to go through and give examples of different little strategies that you can do to help you perform positive habits more easily. So the first one, if we're going to work on the cue habit, work on reminding yourself and creating that trigger to perform a habit, we want to adjust our environment, right? So if you want to repeat a habit enough, you need to have the right cue to repeat that habit, the right trigger to repeat that habit often. Sometimes it's just being able to see that thing more often, right? And likewise, to stop a negative habit, you just adjust your environment to not be in the presence of the negative trigger as often, which sometimes is easier said than done, but I'll give a simpler example for right now. So if you want to have the more positive habit of eating more vegetables, more positive habit of eating more fruit and vegetables, an easy way to adjust your environment to do that more easily, to do it more frequently, is to just have more fruit and vegetables out in the open for you to see. Having them on your dining room table, having them on your living room table, having them not tucked away in the drawer of your refrigerator, and having them on the shelves themselves. So when you open the refrigerator, you actually see it, right? When you see these foods more often, you're going to be more likely to crave these foods, or at least take action on consuming these foods and build that habit of being healthier, build that habit of eating more vegetables and fruit and color. And likewise, on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you have candy out all the time, you have sweets out all the time, you are going to be more likely to eat those things because they're available. When you see them, you want them, or when you see them, you feel compelled to eat them. You might not necessarily want them, but because they're there, you want to eat them. It's the same idea. So on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you want to stop eating those foods, hiding those foods, and making them hard to access is one way that you can do that. John Berardi, Dr. John Berardi of Precision Nutrition, made Berardi's Law, as he likes to call it, and it's that whatever is in the house will get eaten. So if you surround yourself with food that no matter what it is, it's likely to get eaten. If it's all donuts, candy, chocolate bars, and things of that nature, you're going to eat that. If it's all fruits, vegetables, lean meats, nutrient-dense foods, you're going to eat that. So surrounding yourself and putting yourself in an environment that is going to help you make more positive decisions, create less resistance between choosing the more positive decision, is a good way to do that. Another thing that you can do is just, again, I mentioned resistance, making the positive decision as easy to make as possible, as easily accessible as possible, so that you don't have to face as much resistance to actually get it done. And that can be, again, like putting things on right in arm's reach of you to do those things as a practical example. But creating more resistance for negative habits that you don't want to perform as often. So for instance, when I'm trying to be productive, going into the productivity thing, I will put my phone in my car in the garage, which from my office, where I'm at right now if you're watching on YouTube, is I gotta open the door, walk all the way downstairs, unlock the garage door, unlock my car door, go into the glove compartment, and then get my phone. So it's a lot of steps to get to that point. It's a lot of resistance to actually perform that habit. It's so much resistance that it's not worth it for me to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to go all the way down there and get my phone, just to check Instagram or do something like that. So I put myself in a position where doing the positive habit of being productive and stopping the negative habit of not being on my phone while trying to write podcast outlines and create content is easier to accomplish. And you can use this example, obviously that's a more extreme example, but you can use this same principle for any aspect of your life. If you want to be a more positive thinking person, following Instagram pages, for instance, that promote positivity is a good way to do that. Reading positive help books, watching positive television shows, things that promote positivity, being around positive people. These are all different things in your environment that you have control over, that you can choose to expose yourself to, that will make doing the positive action much easier for you to accomplish. So that's the first thing. First thing is manipulating the cue aspect of your habit, and adjusting your environment to create the trigger of performing the positive habit easier and performing the negative habit more difficult. The next thing is actually going to work on, the next strategy is going to work on the craving aspect of this, the habit loop. And this is called temptation bundling. And this is where you pair a new habit that you want to do, or a new habit you want to incorporate, with something you already enjoy doing. And this can actually work with craving and reward at the same time. So let's say, for instance, you really enjoy laying down and watching TV, right? Really simple. But you don't enjoy as much, but you should do going on a 15-20 minute walk through your day to help with your fat loss goals, right? What you can do and kind of give yourself the reward of, but also make you crave doing this activity more, is that if you do this 15-20 minute walk, then you can sit down and watch your show, right? You have a temptation to watch this show. You want to watch this show, but you'll hold off on doing it until you accomplish this habit, because this is a positive habit you want to do, right? That kind of thing, again, can be applied to any situation, but it's just about finding something you enjoy doing and finding an activity finding the habit that you want to do, and using it as a reward in a way to perform the habit more consistently. And now on a more subconscious level and on a more neurological level, you're always going to associate this habit that you're building with something positive that you enjoy, which is really powerful. I think, more than anything, rewarding as opposed to punishing is a more productive stance and a more impactful stance to your mind to actually build longer lasting habits. So finding ways to reward these things through temptation bundling is key to incorporate. Temptation bundling is something I like to do. Something similar to temptation bundling is habit stacking, is as a tool to help you perform habits more often. So habit stacking is pairing a habit you want to incorporate with a habit you already have. The difference between the two, because they get confused very often, is with habit stacking, the habit doesn't necessarily need to be something you enjoy or something that's positive. It could just be a neutral habit, right? Like brushing your teeth, for instance, is more of a neutral habit. Obviously, you can argue it's a positive habit because it's great for your dental health, which is great for your digestive health, great for your mental health, and whatever. You look good because you brush your teeth more often and you just feel better. But for the sake of fat loss, it's a neutral habit. It's not helping you lose fat. It's not helping you gain fat. So if you were to, for instance, pair brushing your teeth with drinking water more often, being more hydrated, you can habit stack that. So you would brush your teeth first and then drink a glass of water afterwards, and you go to sleep. You just upped your hydration and created a positive habit of being hydrated before you go to sleep, which really helps with your recovery, simply by stacking these two habits together. Another thing you could do, and something I incorporate with my clients as well, is after brushing your teeth, or before, depending on the person, you pre-log some of your meals for the next day. So ideally, you have a couple of staple meals that you always go to. And maybe you already have a decision for what you're gonna have for dinner, or if you're going out or whatever. You can pre-log your meals for the next day and be prepared. And you do that before or after brushing your teeth. And now you just stack these two habits. And now the next day, you don't have to worry about food. You don't have to wonder where your calories are coming from. You don't have to stress about, am I gonna hit my goals or not? You just do it because you're prepared to do it. And this habit of preparation saves you all of that stress and anxiety the next day. So habit stacking is another thing that is very helpful and very impactful and very easy to do. Just sometimes it takes a little trial and error to find out what's a practical way to stack two different habits for you. And this obviously depends on person to person, what your schedule is like, what your life is like, and what maybe even a setup of your house is like, or immediate environment. But once you find something that works, all it takes after that is repetition to continue to build that habit. And now, on the topic of repetition, that leads to the next habit hack, which is the 2-minute rule. And this plays on the actual action aspect of the habit loop. So when we talk about habits, the reason a habit becomes a habit in your mind, why it becomes an automatic behavior, is because you've repeated it so many times. It's the repetition that makes a habit a habit. It's not how much of it you're doing. So let's say, for instance, you want to be someone that walks every day. You want to build the habit of walking. You want to be a morning walker. How many times can I say walk in 30 seconds? But you want to, that's something you want to embody, that's something you want to become, that's something you want to do. If you set the goal of having a 30-minute walk every single morning, it's so long, it's not going to be practical for every single morning. There's going to be things that come up. It's going to take a lot of willpower to actually get out of bed and go outside and walk for 30 minutes. There's a lot of resistance there, and we talked about resistance earlier. The less resistance it takes to build a new habit, the better. So that's where the 2-minute rule comes in. Ideally, if you're trying to build a new habit, and this is especially impactful for habits you've tried doing but always failed at repeating, make it so that it never takes longer than 2 minutes to complete. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing for your mind to create that neural pathway to make this about a long-lasting habit and an automatic behavior is the repetition. So if you do a 2-minute behavior 30 days in a row, that is going to do more for you than doing a 30-minute behavior on and off for 2 or 3 months. You're going to ingrain the identity in your mind much deeper by just breaking it down smaller and executing it. The problem is most people don't see or think that just doing something for 2 minutes can play a role, but 2 minutes consistently of doing a thing is actually a pretty long time when you think about it and when you focus on it. And when you can focus more again on the repetition as opposed to the magnitude, how much of it you're doing, you are setting your future self up for more success in the pursuit of whatever you're doing. So this is something I like to do with my clients as well, is literally find any habit that you want to do and practice it for 2 minutes and then move on. If you want to meditate more often, set a timer for 2 minutes, meditate for 2 minutes. You don't need to meditate for 30 minutes. You don't need to be mindful for an hour. That would be great. That's cool. At some point, maybe you could do that. But to start off, make it as easy to accomplish as possible. Get those reps in. The reps are the most important thing. Do it for 2 minutes. Some more inexperienced people that have like gym intimidation, I'll say just go in the gym and sit on a machine for 2 minutes. Just sit on one machine for 2 minutes and then leave. You don't have to even work out the first couple of days that you're there, but just get in the habit of being there, get in the habit of being present and participating to some capacity. And maybe the next week you'll spend 2 minutes of doing a machine. And then next week, the week after that, you can spend 2 minutes of doing 2 different machines, right? And then making a habit of that until you're able to do a full workout. But you gotta start somewhere, and starting small is better than not starting at all. Doing the thing is the secret to actually getting the benefits of the thing. And if you make doing it so difficult for you to do, you create so much resistance behind it, you'll never get the benefit of it. So 2-minute rule is very, very impactful, especially again for those people that are kind of all or nothing. I always suggest implementing and breaking it down to a 2-minute bite-sized chunk that you can easily execute no matter what. Because at the end of the day, everyone can always find 2 minutes to do something positive for themselves. And if not, you just don't want to do the thing, or it's not in line with what you want to become. Which goes into the next one, which is finding a new identity for yourself. I think a lot of people will try to build a habit that they think they should be doing, quote unquote, but don't know why they're doing it. And beyond that, maybe they know why they're doing it, maybe they know what the benefits of it are, but they're trying to do it while being something else, right? The most common example for this, and this is actually the example that James Clear uses in his book, is people that try to quit smoking. They'll call themselves smokers that are trying to quit smoking. If you're a smoker, by definition, you're someone who smokes. So if you're trying to quit smoking, you're doing something that is in direct conflict with who you are, with your identity. And you're not going to be able to follow through with it as easily because, again, you're doing something you shouldn't be doing as a smoker. Whereas, and this has been studied and shown to be true for people in Alcoholics Anonymous and, again, people trying to quit cigarettes or any kind of really deep addiction, if they redefine themselves as something else, I'm a healthy person that doesn't smoke, or something similar to that. I'm a regular person who occasionally smokes. If maybe you don't want to quit it entirely, you can put yourself in a position where I'll occasionally smoke, I'll occasionally drink. This is who I am. You can better put yourself in a position to follow through with that because it matches your identity, it matches who you're trying to become. In relating this to fat loss, there's a lot of people that have that struggle with keeping the weight off because they have subconsciously or consciously defined themselves as big people. They've defined themselves as big people, and when they lose the weight, they still have the big person mentality of how to eat. They have I'm dieting to lose. I'm a big person trying to lose weight, and I'm trying to be healthy, as opposed to I'm a healthy person trying to improve my health and look better. Now, I'm kind of confusing myself here. So backtracking a little bit, when we look at the phenomenon that goes on in the US, where 80% of people that lose 20 pounds in a year gain all of that back and more in the same time frame, it's largely in part because they're looking at this change that they're going through as a temporary thing. It's not something that fits their identity. I'm still a big person mentally. I'm still a big person up in my head, but I'm doing this temporarily. I'm doing this to be healthy, but I'm still a big person at heart, kind of idea. When you get to that goal weight, right? You lose 20 pounds, let's say, like most people do. A lot of people lose 20 pounds. It's really easy to lose the weight, but they still in their mind define themselves as a big person. They still in their mind define themselves as binge eaters. They still in their mind define themselves as someone that doesn't enjoy working out, and all of those kind of things. They quickly rebound off of that and go back to those behaviors that fit that identity that they have. They go back to behaviors that fit that big person mentality that got them to the weight gain that they originally had in the first place. And that's a big part of why a lot of people will inevitably rebound, why 80% of people that lose 20 pounds gain it all back and more within a year, because they haven't accurately given themselves an identity for maintenance in the long term. They haven't changed who they are inside, and eventually the outside will catch up and follow through with that. So changing your identity, this is something I preach very heavily with my clients to do as they go through this journey. It's definitely a conversation I have multiple times with every person trying to lose weight, because it is something that I think not a lot of people consider, and not a lot of people realize that it's happening to them. So if this is you, I hope you found this helpful. And then the last habit building tool that I'm going to talk about today is going to really revolve around the idea of reward, the habit loop phase of reward. And one of the easiest ways to do this is having a whiteboard handy to you, because when we talk about, I'll explain what it is in a second, but going back to what we talked about earlier about what it takes to maintain and build a habit that's going to last a lifetime, and be ingrained in your mind, create that neural pathway in your mind that your brain always goes through as the default for all of its decision making, it comes down to repetition. And rewarding yourself for repetition is a good way to reinforce, again, that habit, reinforce the joy you get from that habit, reinforce the repetition of that habit. And then ultimately, the habit itself kind of maintains itself at that point because you've done it so many times. So an easy way to do this is to have, for instance, a calendar or a whiteboard, and you draw like 30 boxes on it. And you keep track of how often you do the habit. Keep track of how often you execute on this habit that you're doing. So let's say, for instance, using an earlier example, we try to be morning walkers, right? We're doing our 2-minute rule. We're doing a 2-minute walk every single morning, no matter what. Or even breaking it down more simply, I should say. This is also really important. It's not to get too specific with your habits. Breaking it down, I do a 2-minute walk every day, just in general, it could be any time. No matter what. Find 2 minutes in the day to just go on a walk, be with myself, and get my steps in. You take your calendar, you take your whiteboard with all the boxes drawn on it, and you just cross off a day for every day that you've done it. So you're basically keeping a tally for how many days in a row that you've done this thing. That little cross, although it doesn't seem so significant, it's like a quick slash of your hand, is also releasing dopamine in your mind, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter that leads us to enjoy any activity that we're doing. And you do that and compound that over a 30-day period as you fill up your calendar, as you fill up all the boxes. And you can even go beyond that. 30 days is usually just a good time frame. People look at time as weeks and months. So that's always a good baseline. You continue to do that over and over and over again. Not only are you getting the repetitions in to ingrain this habit, you're also getting a small reward every single time in this dopamine release for slashing and crossing out the date of doing it. And now you've reinforced this neural pathway to continue to do this habit even after the calendar is filled. Now you do this instinctually. Now this is one of your automatic behaviors that you can always turn to. Another way to do this, if you don't have, I've seen a lot of creative ways to do this. One other way that I've seen is having 2 jars as well. One is filled with marbles and one is empty. And every day that you do one, you're transferring 1 marble from the filled jar into the empty jar. And now one jar will slowly empty day by day, and another jar will slowly fill itself up day by day as you go through it. And now you have a visual representation to see how far you've come and how well you've done with the process. So that is a very powerful one, and it's one I use daily, and I have found a lot of success with anecdotally with myself and with my clients that do it, because it's so easy. It's so easy to implement, and it's so motivating, especially if you put it in a place that you constantly see it. I have my whiteboard in my office. It's off camera. You can't see it for the people on YouTube, but I got all my check mark boxes on there, titled with whatever activity I want to do and how often I want to do it. And I see that every single day. And every single day, I want to cross out that box. I want to continue the streak that I built for myself. And it's a good motivator in a lot of ways, because again, I don't want to break that streak. Of course, I could always lie to myself and just slash them all out, but that doesn't help anybody in the end. So that is it for today's podcast. I'm just making sure I covered all the simple habit building strategies for you. So we had environment adjustment, habit stacking, temptation bundling, the 2-minute rule, creating a new identity, and I didn't name this one. I guess we could call it like a tally system or something. But yeah, the tally system, the calendar tally system. Those are all really effective ways for you to become, to reinforce doing the positive habit that you are trying to build. But thank you everyone for listening and tuning into this episode. Hopefully you found it helpful. And if you do any of these, I would love to see you executing on them. If you are doing any of these habits, post it on your Instagram story, record yourself doing it, or take a picture of your boxes and tag StupidFit at STOOPID.fit. I would love to see how you're putting this into action and building a better life for yourself and becoming the person you want to become as you fulfill the new identity you built for yourself. So thank you again for listening. Hope you found this helpful, and I will see you guys on the next episode.